Welcome, USFL football and fantasy football fans. This is the first episode of Blitz Brothers Fantasy Show presented by the USFL Network. I am Ace, joined by my younger brother and USFL trader, Maverick, who is a Panthers fan. First, I want to thank our sponsors, RoyalRetros.com. If you go and buy any of the old retro USFL gear, it is incredibly high quality. We are both wearing our hats from the website. And if you use promo code USFL Network, all one word, no space, at checkout, you get 10% off. All right. So, Maverick, where can we find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter at PodinMyTake1 or anywhere else you can find the USFL Network.
All right. So, my brother and I decided to make this show because we've been competing and talking about fantasy for many years. And we thought that we would jump in. We've been doing the USFL Network thing, and we thought we would bring all of our, knowledge to all of you USFL football fans and fantasy football fans and combine it and get it out to you. So we are making this show, and it's going to come out weekly starting next week. And what are we going to cover, Maverick?
So our show's preseason will be talking player rankings by position, draft strategy. Once the season starts, we will have each of our three stardoms, situms, and sleepers. Also, we'll have fun segments and special guests.
And speaking of special guests, we have a guest today from the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, which works directly with altfantasysports.com. If you go there and create a USFL league, you will see articles with rankings and top 50 players in the league written by the Sports Gambling Podcast. And odds are some of them will be written by our guest, Matt Morris. So without further ado, let's bring him on. Matt, how are we doing today?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing fantastic.
Living the dream.
By the way, I do love the hats, though.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you go to royalretros.com, you can get one with our promo code.
I probably will. I'm also a football junkie, so it's bound to happen at this point.
There you go. So our guest, Matt, he is a writer for Sports Gambling Podcast Network. He wrote basically half the articles that are going to be on altfantasysports.com when you go create a league and read their articles. You can find him on Twitter at MattMorris12. And, I'll give it to you, Matt. Explain to us what you do for SGPN other than what I've said.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on here. It's a pleasure. This is a really cool thing you guys got going here, and I'm glad, people are getting hyped about the USFL because why not for spring football, right? I mean, I've been a football fan basically my whole life, as I'm sure you guys have been. And it's just, the NFL has kind of transitioned to like a 365-day-a-year sport because the off season is wild, but it's nice to have some real football in between. But yeah, so like you said, I'm a sports writer and content creator for the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. I'm actually relatively new. I've been doing it for a few months, but it's been a lot of fun. The USFL has been one of the areas I've been covering, obviously. But yeah, I'm just, a hardcore fan of fantasy sports, football, baseball, pretty much my whole life. I was recruited by SGPN mainly to cover, fantasy sports, whether it's baseball or football, the NFL, the MLB, spring football, and I even did some Olympic coverage, so that was a blast. But yeah, so, and in my short time at SGPN, we've done a lot of fun things. I think you listened in on it. We did a live mock USFL fantasy football draft that was, one, a blast, two, super educational because it gave us all sorts of insight on how a draft may actually end up going. It probably changed my draft strategy a little bit, given some things I learned along the way. But, you guys should keep an eye out because we do plan on having a live SGPN-wide USFL fantasy draft. So keep an eye out for that, where it's not going to be a mock this time. I believe we're going to actually draft the teams that we are going to use on Alt Fantasy Sports this season. So it'll be a live draft, and you can watch us get sniped like we did during the mock. I'm sure my favorite players will be taking the pick before me, as they always seem to in every fantasy sport that I play. So you can hear me just moaning about that.
Oh, you're good. And I did listen to that whole thing. It changed my draft strategy, but then we did our USFL Network Fantasy League before this, and that changed my strategy altogether again. It's so much different. Speaking of differences, in your opinion, what's the difference between an NFL fantasy football league and, say, a USFL or just alternative football league in general?
Yeah, I mean, I would say alt fantasy leagues, whether it's USFL. I mean, alt fantasy in particular, they even held they hosted fantasy sports for the AAF and XFL when those were a thing before they got shut down. But you have to be more flexible. I mean, there's less teams in the league than the NFL. Obviously, you're talking 30 plus teams in the NFL. The USFL is only going to have 8 or so teams. Sometimes you have to include new and unique rules, such as the one you guys told me about, where you did the whole auto drafting of the backup quarterback of the quarterback you chose. Which, oddly enough, I don't know if you guys noticed this. I don't know if you actually used the feature on Alt Fantasy, but it was brought to my attention that you can actually there's a setting on Alt Fantasy where you can just kind of draft. Let's say I was interested in the Bandits quarterback, as we've talked about. You can just draft like Bandits QB1, and then if he were to go down like week 2, you would automatically get the stats from his backup that took his place. So that's an option. I don't know if you guys used that or how you did your whole first quarterback, backup quarterback thing, but that's an option. Yeah, I just found out about that this morning, and I was like, I should have told you about it sooner. But I figured we'd talk about it on the show. I thought maybe he knew about it. But anyway, so even as far as draft strategies go, I mean, in the NFL, right? If you're doing NFL fantasy football, running back dominate round 1. The dominant wide receivers, especially in PPR leagues, dominate rounds 1 and 2. Unless you're going after somebody like Patrick Mahomes, maybe you'll make an exception. But I think with spring football, all fantasy leagues or the USFL specifically, more times than not, a run on quarterbacks will dominate the first round. And that's because most spring leagues, the teams that see success have, successful or elite quarterbacks. And that's likely to be reflected in fantasy team success. So I would look for the quarterbacks to go first. I'm not sure how your draft went. But I actually, just for fun, also looked back at some of the XFL fantasy stats. And there was quite the gap between the top quarterbacks and, say, the top flex options. So you can assume that in most other spring fantasy football leagues, you'll see a similar stat gap. So that's why it's important to target those quarterbacks early. I mean, in the XFL, I think PJ Walker was the number 1 scoring quarterback. His point total ended up being like 134.4 or something like that. And so you had, I think so there was 8 teams in the XFL, and I think 4 quarterbacks exceeded the 60-point mark. And I think out of all your flex players, so all your running backs, your wide receivers, and tight ends, only 3 of them exceeded that 60-point mark. So you can see how quarterbacks are like really important. Yeah. So I think that's something important to keep in mind. I know some folks want to get like tricky and maybe take their position players first and snag their quarterback later. But I think if you have one of the 1, 2, or 3 top quarterbacks, especially in the USFL coming up this season, that might be the difference between you competing and being the seller of the whole season. So that's, I just think you really have to be more flexible in your, I mean, for example, only 8 teams, right? So if you have more than 8 guys that want to play, maybe you want to do an all flex, all super flex type deal, just so that you don't have to go after those quarterbacks around one. There's just all sorts of options, and I think alt is pretty flexible to allow you to do those kind of things.
No, I completely agree. I mean, just the way we set up our league, you can really play around with the positions and how it's set up. Like you brought up, and we'll get into a little later, I believe. We had 8 teams, and we did have a designated quarterback slot. So if you got that quarterback, whatever quarterback you got, you automatically had to draft their backup as your last pick. I kind of tried to be tricky. I didn't go quarterback in the first round, and so I ended up getting. Yeah, I ended up getting Shea Patterson like super late because nobody wanted him. After
you respect Shea Patterson, all right?
Yeah,
Shea Patterson in my presence.
Yeah. So after talking to Chase Demore last night about the quarterback situation, I don't feel great, but I'll hand it back over to Maverick as he has our next question for you.
So, Matt, once the season starts, how will waivers and roster movement and pickups be available on the Alt Fantasy Football website?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I do think it was either today or tomorrow that waivers going live. I actually didn't get a chance to check today, but I know drafts went live first. Obviously, you guys did a draft, so you're able to do that. And so the Alt Fantasy folks were rolling out some of the features gradually to make sure everything was refined before it comes out. But my understanding is the default for the waivers will just be the standard waivers that we're all we all love and we're all used to. So post draft, reverse draft order, right, and then kind of rolling week in and week out there. So if you don't pick anybody up, you'll be higher up on the waiver order. There's going to be an option for FAB, free agent budget acquisition, and maybe some flexibility there. So you'll see standard FAB, standard waivers, and then maybe some modifications of those two. That's as much detail as I have about it at this point. I do know that I think there's different league types, which I think is pretty interesting. Like you can have your traditional head-to-head.
Mm-hmm.
I think they might have best ball already, or they're planning on making that an option. I believe you can do rotisserie leagues. So just, going for total points out of the whole league, which I think is kind of cool. I used to do that in fantasy baseball leagues, and I always enjoyed it. So and in the future, I don't know if you guys know this, there might be some free DFS, so daily fantasy sports on the Alt Fantasy site, and SGPN is actually planning on hosting a few contests and providing prizes. I believe they're going to be free as well, so something to keep an eye out for. A lot of cool, fun features coming.
Well, that's awesome. I did not know that. We've never used a FAB waiver pickup before, but because it's a new football league, it's a new experience. We decided we were going to try a new waiver for the first time. So We'll see how that goes. But the way that we set up our network league was I actually have a graphic for it so that I can read it off the screen. Here we go.
Cool.
We have one quarterback, one running back, one wide receiver, 3 flex positions, not super flex. So it's wide receiver, running back, or tight end, 1 defense, 1 kicker, and 3 bench. But as I kind of mentioned earlier, you almost have 2 bench because your third bench will be your backup quarterback, as we have 8 teams in our league. So each person gets a starting quarterback. So I, de facto had Shea Patterson as he was the last one taken. So it's a cool way to do it.
So you had Patterson and Paxton Lynch, then.
I do. I have Shea and Paxton. But a funny thing is that we'll get into a little later tips on how to set up your draft. A lot of people ended up auto picking at the end, and I didn't get Paxton Lynch. So once edit roster comes out,
You'll have to fix
play
that.
with teams. Yeah, I got to go play with teams. But
it's all
Maverick,
over.
I believe Maverick has the next question.
So after seeing our league, Matt, how have you seen most leagues set up so far?
So I think 8 teams it's probably pushing it, depending on with what you guys are doing. Obviously 8 was the absolute max, right? There's only 8 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
I think for the most part, the sweet spot, if you want to use kind of like traditional rosters, similar, like I would say you guys arguably have a traditional roster. Probably 4 to 6 teams is the sweet spot. 4 might be a little boring, so maybe 6 is the sweet spot. But I think you guys probably did a pretty good job replicating what I've seen mostly done. I don't have the league we're in pulled up here, but I think our rosters were pretty similar to yours. I think we're planning on being in depending on how we end up divvying up everybody SGPN and if we do multiple leagues or whatever. But I think it's going to end up being probably 4 to 6 teams, 1 quarterback, 1 or 2 running backs, probably a couple receivers, a couple flex spots. Probably very similar to yours. There's lots of variations, but I think I'm a traditional guy. So I think we'll probably stick to something similar to yours.
Okay. And when you're writing your articles, do you have a certain scoring and type of league that you have in mind while you're writing the articles, like such as PPR or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially with spring leagues, it's really important to just always assume full point PPR. There's a couple of reasons for that. It bumps up the scoring, right? There's potential for there to be kind of low scores in such a small league like this. There's only 8 teams. There's only 38 players on each roster. I don't know if you guys realize that. I'm sure you do. But compared to the NFL, they're in like the 50s, right? So they're definitely a lot smaller. I remember when these rosters were first dropping, and I was kind of doing my research and trying to figure out who got drafted where, and what the depth charts were going to be. And then they had the supplemental draft, and I was like, oh, let's see how these rosters were filled out. So like in my head, I'm thinking like, oh, most teams drafted 2 running backs. All right, let me go figure out who everybody's RB3 is. And then, I'm getting there and I'm doing the breakdowns. I'm like, well, some teams don't have an RB3. They didn't draft a running back in the supplemental draft because they don't have the roster spots for it. I mean, they've got an offensive line to fill out. They've got a defensive line to fill out. But yeah, I would say for the most part, always assume, and I know in my articles, in everybody who writes for SGPN on USFL content, I believe we try to stick with the PPR strategy simply because it bumps up the scoring and it makes more players relevant, right? If you've got a pass catching running back and that's a specialty out of the backfield, without it being PPR, he might be next to, I mean, I wouldn't call him useless, but he might not be somebody you target or get used a lot. But with it being PPR, he might be a solid flex option every week. You know what I mean? So I think those two things in particular make PPR really the way to go, especially in smaller leagues like this. And yeah, and just to point out too, in addition to PPR making players more relevant, I think another thing to keep in mind is if there's guys that you don't think are going to be like pass catching specialists or something like that, keep an eye out for guys that have some position versatility. I kind of think like John Franklin III, who's on the Bandits. I don't know how much you know about him. Smart move. And here's why. Because
the new
the
rule,
USFL.
Yes.
Yes. So the double pass rule, right? John Franklin was a quarterback in college. Didn't really do well necessarily as a quarterback, and kind of moved around, became a gadget guy. But I very much see people, I wouldn't say abusing, but there is definitely going to be some special plays written in some playbooks using that double pass rule. And I can see a guy like John Franklin catching, them getting him in space behind the line of scrimmage, and then him just launching a second pass, right, for some big play touchdown. So he's a good bench stash, in my opinion. So I think that was a great move on your part because he could be a savior in the flex spot some weeks. But yeah, that was I wanted to sneak that little fantasy tip into one of these segments, so I chose here.
Dude, I have been hyping up John Franklin. What is it, second or third? It's one of those.
I think I thought it was the third. Maybe it's the second.
I think it is the third. John Franklin III. I watched Last Chance U. I've known this guy is for years. And I was super excited, especially I already thought he was going to be cool because of the minimal rosters, that he was such a flexible player. And then when you look at the new rule with the double pass, like that's it. I was like, this is a guy. He is a fantasy pick. If you can get him late and people aren't thinking about it, you might have your flex. But now I was wondering for our viewers, this is the fantasy show. We got to talk about rankings a little bit. Can you give us your top 2 quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers? And then I'll give you my 3 and 4 quarterbacks, and Mav will give you he'll give you his 3 and 4 quarterbacks, and I'll give you my 3 and 4 running backs.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm probably going to cheat a little bit. I know you said top 2. I'm probably going to end up talking about more than 2, especially. I'm sorry, but as far as quarterback goes, I mean, you know who my number 1 is, right? You're going to make fun of the way I've said his name in the past, but
Kyle Jordan. That's who it is, right?
No. I think the Bandits, and it seems like a lot of people agree with me, are kind of the consensus power ranked number 1 team going in first season. They just have a lot of talent, a lot of continuity. A lot of people are hyped about Todd Haley's vertical passing offense. I know he's flamed out in the NFL, but this isn't the NFL, right? And he clearly has that NFL experience. So Jordan Tao Almu is the way you told me to say it. I've been calling him Jordan Taumu. But I love the guy, right? Like, he's got a huge arm and electric release. He's got wheels. I mean, if you're looking for a guy with a variety of extensive professional experience, he's your guy. In addition to that professional experience, he's pretty much produced at every level. I believe his senior year was 2018 at Ole Miss, where he threw for like 3,900 yards, 19 touchdowns to like 8 picks. It was a strong senior season, and he's a dual threat quarterback. He rushed for over 300 yards and 6 touchdowns. So I would say, in what is it, a 10-game season for the USFL, he's probably good for 400 rushing yards, maybe 5 touchdowns. And I mean, if you guys have been playing fantasy football as long as I have, there's nothing more juicy than a quarterback that puts up rushing stats as well. Like, those juicy 100% rushing touchdowns are just like the difference between an average and an elite fantasy quarterback sometimes. So, I mean, I had a lot of reasons to like him. He's just fun to watch, right? But like, when you start looking at his stats and like what he's capable of doing and the offense he landed in, I think there's a reason a lot of people are hyped. I mean, those are the kind of numbers that would win you like a fantasy season, even if you had a few hiccups, like you made a few poor picks. Like you got a quarterback that's rushing and passing and putting up these huge monster weeks. We've seen what it can do in the NFL. But like I said, he has professional experience as well, right? He even played as short-lived as the XFL was. He threw for, I think, I'm trying to think how many. The season was cut short. I can't remember exactly how many games it went, but he still threw for over. It was 5. Thank you. I almost said 4. I couldn't remember if it was 4 or 5. But yeah, in 5 games, he threw for over 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns, 2 picks, and also rushed for 200 yards and a touchdown in those 5 games. So, I mean, everywhere he's been, he's produced. And, I know you made fun of me before coming on here that I wasn't only allowed to talk about the Bandits, so I won't. But I just think the mix of his skills and his versatility with what likely Todd Haley's offense is going to look like, there's a reason he's kind of like the Ringer consensus number 1, and he's my number 1 as well. So I know I said top 2, but I'm going to quickly talk about 2 more because to me they're kind of 2A and 2B, and I'll explain why. 2A being Kyle Slaughter, which might not be a popular opinion, but there's an argument to be made that he has some of the highest upside. Now he might have a low floor as well. But if you're willing to take that gamble, right, there's a few things that I really like about him. He's got the build of a traditional big-bodied athletic quarterback. He's like 6'5", 218, right? He has some. In college, he wasn't always a quarterback, but when he was a quarterback, his senior year at Northern Colorado, he threw for almost 3,000 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 10 picks. Now, those 29 touchdowns set a University of North Carolina Division I single-season program record when he did it, right? So it's not like he's not accomplished. And like I said, he hasn't always been a quarterback. He played all over the field before transitioning to quarterback. He was a starting slot receiver and even played some special teams at one point. So clearly, he's athletic, has some speed, has some agility. He can move. He's not just going to stand in the pocket and do nothing. And to me, that translates to, okay, he'll probably have some rushing success as well. So you can see where I'm going with this. I'm thinking rushing totals, more fantasy production. He also landed with the Breakers. I know, I think that was the last pick of the first round, which is kind of crazy.
It was.
Yeah. So, which is why I think a lot of people probably aren't as big on Slaughter as I am. But my logic being he landed in a Larry Fedora offense. And Larry Fedora was at the helm of, I believe it was the 2016 UNC Tar Heels when Mitch Trubisky absolutely blew up. Now I know Mitch Trubisky isn't like a household NFL name, right? It's not like he's a schlub either. He does have a Pro Bowl under his belt, but kind of what I'm thinking is their like makeup is similar in that Trubisky is able to run, but he's not like a run first quarterback. So that's kind of where I'm thinking Slaughter might go. Because in 2016 for the Tar Heels, I think Trubisky threw for like over 3,500 yards. He had like 30 touchdowns. He also rushed for 308 yards with 5 touchdowns or 5 rushing touchdowns. So I'm kind of picturing Slaughter in that mold where he might be like Trubisky for UNC kind of thing. It's not like he doesn't rush in the NFL either, but Fedora was his coach then, and now he's coaching Slaughter for the Breakers. So I think he's clearly higher risk, higher reward than somebody like Talmu. But I think he's worth the shot, especially if you miss out on somebody you like. And people don't realize, too, he never quite stuck with an NFL team. But he actually, in the 2017 NFL preseason for the Denver Broncos, he was the league leading passer that preseason. He had like 125 or more passer rating, I believe. And I think he had the most yards and touchdowns that preseason as well. Obviously never stuck, and preseason is preseason. But, there are indicators that the talent is there. My 2B, and he's a big fan favorite over at SGPN, is Brian Scott. Our staff they're all big fans of him. I mean, in addition to being just like a really genuine and nice guy, he's a hell of a football player. He's obviously a gamer. This is where, and the reason I'm doing 2A, 2B is I like Slaughter's athletic ability and potential upside. Scott, it's more just like his experience and like his success speaks for it. Just, oh my God, right? Like it just speaks for itself. So he's obviously a gamer. He's won championships and awards at multiple levels. And I think when it comes to USFL, there's a lot of unknowns. We're throwing a lot of darts at the dartboard, right? We're like trying to come up with something to give us an idea of like who's going to set themselves apart. And I think one of the things you have to look at is professional experience, because not everybody has it already. And he does in spades. He played his college ball at Occidental College in California, and I think 2016 was his senior season. He was the first team all-conference quarterback. He was their team captain. He was the SCIAC Player of the Year. I think he became the all-time passing leader for that league and Occidental. He finished his career with like over 9 yards, 77 touchdowns to like 22 interceptions. It was pretty incredible. I mean, and not only was he a decorated champion in college, he goes on and plays for the Spring League. He wins that starting quarterback job for the Generals in 2020. He leads them to an undefeated season and a championship. He was named the MVP of the league and the championship game. So, like, how can you not think that this guy is not just going to come into the USFL and do the same thing? So, I apologize. I talked about 3. You said 2, but to me, I liked that comparison of Slaughter and Scott being kind of like the high upside athletic ability who might have fallen into like the perfect system, and then Scott, who just like his resume is ridiculous, right? Just it's incredible. So those are my top 3 quarterbacks.
Okay.
So do you want me to? Are you going to talk about your quarterbacks, or do you want me to move on?
So yeah,
Maverick has the next one.
So you took my top 3 as well, believe it or not, and I drafted. I drafted Kyle Slaughter, so I just wanted you to keep talking, keep getting me excited about it, because I wasn't too high on the pick, but now I'm feeling a little better about it.
I think you should be. I think you should.
Yeah. And so actually, this is going to make Ace pretty excited. I think I've bounced around in my 4 position, and I think I have to go with Clayton Thorson. He in Northwestern, he showed some tremendous flair. Obviously, he had an interception problem. But obviously in fantasy, as a actual quarterback, that's not a great thing. But in fantasy, that's only -2 points. And if he throws a lot more touchdowns than interceptions, what do you care? You know what I mean? And in the Big Ten, I believe at the time, I don't know if it's still true, he was the only Big Ten quarterback to throw for 10,000 yards and rush for 20 touchdowns. So he's still got a dual threat capability. I mean, it's not 1 or 2, but he's still up there. I think you can wait on him in the draft, get him in late first round. If not a lot of quarterbacks are picked, you could even get him in the second round. I think he's a steal of a player. I know he's probably not going to be the best quarterback in the league, but I would put him at number 4.
No, I don't. No, I don't disagree with you. I think, and even at SGPN, I think we did some consensus rankings, and it seemed like Thorson was always falling in that like 3, 4, 5 range. Like he wasn't quite the top of the top, but he was not, in the cellar either. And oddly enough, during our mock draft, I don't know if you remember from listening, but one of the guys actually waited on quarterback and got Thorson kind of late, and it was
like the 3rd round.
Yeah, that was we were all pretty impressed with that. It was an interesting way that mock draft went, but that was one of the steals of our mock draft for sure.
And then Maverick, who's your number 5?
My number 5 would probably be Alex Magoo. Magoo. I like him. I mean, obviously he's not in my top half, but I think he shows some flair. I think if you need a dependable quarterback, he's going to be a dependable quarterback. I don't think he's going to be the top of the scoring at all times, but I think he's got a pretty good offense with the Stallions. I like their coach. He's an offensive-minded coach. They've got a lot of talent, a good offensive line. I don't see a lot of downside for him. I think he's got a lot of upside and fantasy value. And he's one of the only quarterbacks who was actually drafted. Most of them went undrafted, so that's got to tell you something.
True. And not only flair, but he also has the hair. I don't know if anybody's been looking at his preseason pictures. That dude has flow.
That's important. I mean, your quarterback's gotta have the swag, man.
I was like, Magoo? I was like, Magoo? Like, who is that? And then I saw his hair, and I was like,
it's like new kind of
cool.
Hair.
Like this dude, he's gonna go throw some touchdowns, and then he's gonna meet you and shotgun a beer at the country concert after. I was like, this is a cool guy.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I hope his hair looks better than Trevor Lawrence's does. I'm just kidding.
I'll give you that. It's more like dangerous looking. I don't know. It's just cool, dude.
We'll take dangerous.
But we are taking a lot of time. So let's just go with, we actually wrote articles for the USFL Network website, which is going to be dropping hopefully here really soon. The articles are already up. We wrote a quarterback article, a running back article, and then a tight end and a wide receiver ranking articles are coming. But I did the running back article. So let's just do running backs. Who are your top 2?
Oh, you cut out on me a little bit there, but I'll keep it short. I won't do a bunch of. I won't. Yeah, I'll do the top 2 running backs. Well, Some news dropped this morning, right? A lot of people had Devion Smith as
my
their
rankings.
consensus number one running back. Just about everyone. I was the only one in our consensus rankings article for SGPN that didn't have him basically as top 1, 2, or 3, and I caught a lot of flack for it. So I'm curious to see how. Nobody told me anything. So I was trying to be a contrarian a little bit. So let's be honest, right? Everyone's big on the running backs for the Maulers, right? Kirby Wilson's the head coach. He's a well-respected NFL running backs coach. So early on in my research, when I was still learning about all things USFL and who went where and what their specialties were, I was going to be big on their running backs. I gravitated towards Garrett Groshek, who I'm going to say is my top running back right now. And I feel much better about it given the news this morning with Smith. But it's not necessarily that he doesn't have like talent. Like his stats don't scream right like stud elite RB1. But I think a lot of his time in Wisconsin, he was in more of a timeshare. So I think that was part of it. But man, if you watch his highlight videos, you would understand why I got hyped watching him. He's just all of a human being. And, Kirby Wilson, that offense for the Maulers is going to be run first. It's going to be play action and throwing to the tight ends. He was part of the 2019, 2020 Oakland and Las Vegas Raiders teams where like Josh Jacobs had a combined 2,200 rushing yard downs in 28 games. You don't think he's seen that success and he's going to try to bring it to his new job. Again, in 4 years in Wisconsin, Groshek only put up, I think, 1,200 rushing yards, about 1,800 scrimmage yards to go with 8 touchdowns. They're not eye-popping numbers, but he was often the thunder to somebody else's lightning. So I think given his affinity for running backs, the run game, I think they're going to establish the run early and often. And I think Groshek is going to be the beneficiary of that. And I think he's going to get all the goal line work. And we all know that's where it's at in fantasy is those touchdowns. So he's my RB1 right now. Things could change. I believe Madre London this morning to
Madre London, the reigning ELF MVP.
MVP. I saw that. So this could shoot me in the butt. Who knows? I mean, it could be London that ends up lighting up the league. There's just so many unknowns, but because that just happened and I'm going to stick with Groshek for now. London could dig into that. My RB2, I'm going to go probably a little untraditional. And I know I said I wouldn't talk about a lot of bandits, but for now, I'm going to go with BJ Emmons. And I know he's not flashy. I know he doesn't have a ton of stats to back it up. I know there's some more fun guys out there. A lot of people like CJ Maribels, a lot of people like Dalen Dawkins, right? I understand those things. But I'm going to go with Emmons. And he's intriguing to me because very often it's where you land, right? And again, he's in this Todd Haley vertical passing offense, and let's say Tamu does what we think he's going to do, and he's the best quarterback in the league. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that there's not going to be a high correlation between his running back and receivers as far as being the top running back and receivers in the league. That happens very often if you look back. Years past, the top quarterback and top offense in the league, that very much often translates to a lot of scoring opportunities for their running backs and receivers. So that's part of the reason why I am on BJ Emmons. And I think there's no reason for him to necessarily come off the field. He's been a very good pass blocker and has decent hands. So I think even if he's not always on the field as like the primary ball carrier or the primary target, I think the fact that he's going to be on the field early and often, because not only will he be running the ball, but he'll be in for pass blocking downs, it's just going to bode well for him, right? The injury bug plagued him in college, so here's to hoping it can fulfill his potential at the USFL. My other thought is Todd Haley, from what I remember, traditionally loves a workhorse 3-down running back. I'm not saying BJ Emmons is Le'Veon Bell, right? I'm just using it as an example. Like he was a 3-down workhorse running back, I believe, in at least a few of the years that Todd Haley was in Pittsburgh. So that's kind of where I'm going with Emmons here. Like I said, I'm obviously high on Tamu. I even went back and using the XFL as an example again. PJ Walker was the number one quarterback and the number one overall scoring the obviously shortened 2020 XFL season. His RB1 and wide receiver 1, I believe, were 2 of the 3 top flex players. So that correlation exists, Yeah. And I will also recognize that there's a complete chance I could be completely wrong here. The Bandits also drafted Juwan Washington, who's pretty electric. He's a little different from BJ Emmons. He's probably going to do a lot of the return work And there's a chance he could be the speedy guy out of the backfield that they throw to a lot. So as far as handcuffs go, I really like him as a handcuff. If you go BJ Edmonds, I think there's a chance that Washington could dig into some of that work point. Maybe not early on, but if you just kind of want to hedge your bets, try to grab them both. And I will stick with 2 running backs, even though I can talk about more.
You're good. No, we could sit here and talk for hours. I just don't think that
that's the problem. I know. They probably wouldn't. I know.
But I agree. I had a Maulers running back for my number 1. I had Devion Smith. Actually, I heard the news this morning. Crushed me almost as much as hearing that a friend of the network, Chris Platt, got hurt and he was released.
Yep.
But for my number 1 pick in the draft, I was number 7. I took Madre London. I was like, I'm going for it.
You did it?
Oh, I believe that he is going to be a workhorse in that backfield. But I have BJ Emmons as number 3. And the reason is that when you watch the highlights between him and Juwan Washington, who is also a friend of the show, I won a wager against him and he had to post push-ups on Twitter. It was awesome. But
that was you? I saw that push-up video. I didn't realize that was against you. That's hysterical. Oh,
yes, that's my guy. I love Juwan. But they're very similar backs, honestly. And I think that they're going to be on a pretty heavy rotation. So that's why BJ Evans wasn't necessarily like my number 2. My number 2 is Darnell Holland. That's because he's on the Stars. He's on the Stars with the wide receiver 1 and the QB 1 from his TSL team that won an MVP, that had the MVP quarterback, won the championship. The chemistry is already there. I think they will be the most put together offense week 1. Their defense is suspect, but I believe the offense is going to be great. And Darnell Holland, I mean, he runs a 4.46 40 time. He has great hands. He can act like a wide receiver sometimes. And I think with Mike Riley's offense, it's an air raid. He will punch the ball with running, but he will be taking shots downfield. And I think that when he's trying to open up those shots, he's going to be feeding Darnell Holland. I mean, we saw it at the TSL. So he's my number 2. And then number 4, I'm a homer. I got to go Dalen Dawkins. I love the guy. I think he's so electric. In my article, I wrote, they're going to have a fast-paced Sumlin offense. Obviously, we saw it at Texas A&M and at Houston. Dawkins is going to be the right-hand man to Thorson as he runs the offense. The Titans running back coach said that he loved Dawkins, but veterans had to take over, and they had to release him. Derrick Henry was on the roster. I don't know what you want, but he has fantastic vision. I know, right? He has fantastic vision. The way he runs, it's like watching a Madden character run. The way he can cut and juke and stop on a dime, it kind of almost looks unfair. And I think that the way someone's going to run the offense, the running back is going to be getting the ball a lot on swing passes, a lot on zones and stretches. And I think that Dalen Dawkins is going to be the guy. So those are my 2 and 4 to fill out your 1 and 2. So.
No, I like it. Yeah, a lot of people are high on Dalen Dawkins. I think he was just about always in our top 4 in our projections and our rankings. It's not surprising. And we all know it's more about touches now, not necessarily carries, right? If they can carry the ball and catch the ball, it's basically what we count now. We almost don't even look at carries anymore. It's how many touches are they going to get?
Yeah, we're going full PPR. So any way that he can touch the ball, I'm like,
right.
Okay, so that's brought us to the end of the topics that we were going to talk about. But then we discussed one before the show where we were going to give tips as far as doing a fantasy league and draft on altfantasysports.com. So we just finished our draft literally 20 minutes before this. Maverick, how'd it go for you? How was it?
It did not go as planned. I don't dislike my team. I like my team a lot, but I did want to go running back heavy, and I did. But I did not get any of the other positions I wanted, and that's okay. We adapt. But I would definitely say my biggest takeaway from the draft was definitely get the running backs you want early. If you can't get those elite quarterbacks, obviously, because if you go in as the 8th pick, just know you're not going to get the number 1 quarterback. But get the running back you want early because they go quick. It was crazy how fast those running backs were taken.
Oh, like every.
I believe it.
Yeah. And then, so most people, you need to lower your expectations a little bit. Don't go into this on altfantasysports.com thinking that it's ESPN, thinking that it's Yahoo. It is a great website, but it is not those. you need to give yourself time for picks. So I decided it's probably better to go a minute 30 per pick and make sure all your people are there because you can't skip. So you don't want anybody auto drafting, but you need to have time. Ours was a 30-second clock, and I would say 75% of the picks ended up being auto drafted. So, we had people bowing out, they were upset, and it was understandable because it was so fast. And the website,
Right.
when you're doing a draft, gets a little overwhelmed, and it will slow down, it will lag a little bit, which is fine. It's understandable in an alt fantasy football website, but you do want to make sure you have time to make sure that you can click on the player that you are going to queue, that you're going to take. And I think those are the big things. And then the last takeaway I had that I mentioned earlier is after the draft, your rosters will not show up. I thought all of them were dropped. I thought it canceled our entire draft. I was like, oh my gosh,
Oh, no.
that was already frustrating. We get to go through it again. No, give it about 30 minutes. The rosters will show up. So those are going to be my big takeaways from our draft. Just some tips. Give yourself time on the picks, minute 30. Make sure everybody's there, and then just have fun. Don't get too serious. Have fun.
Yeah, it's great that you guys did the draft for the show too. That's it's great to hear like actual users that went through the draft and have that feedback. And like as you guys know, everything about spring football and everything about the USFL came together so fast, right? Like it was boom, 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 leagues coming. Here's the draft. Here's the rosters. Games are starting next month, right? So it's great that alt fantasy it's really come a long way too. They were around for AAF and XFL fantasy. They were kind of on their own, and they really, before partnering with SGPN, they were managing everything on their own. And now that they're partnered with SGPN, obviously there's a short window, but it's really coming a long way, and it's only going to get better. Right. So like prior to partnering with SGPN, they were only using a scraper to get info and statistics. That's fine. It works. The problems are it leads to some lag. You have to wait for sites to update and pull stats from in more places. The process just has more areas where it can go awry. And once they partnered with SGPN, they supplied them with an API, an application programming interface, provided by the USFL via Sports Radar. Provides all sorts of info for all the players in the USFL in real time. So now the alt fantasy folks, all they need to do is plug in that API, and they can spend the majority of their time working on the creative features and making a better user experience, which is what you're seeing now, things slowly being rolled out now that they have this API in place. And it's going to, like you said, it's not ESPN, but it's going to get closer to that feel. So that's the plan, right? Like, you weren't able to play fantasy spring football elsewhere. We've tried to check out to see if there was anywhere else we could play it. Everything else feels like a glorified spreadsheet. And this isn't. So it's pretty great. And it even works great on mobile. I've tried it on my phone a few times. So the fact that the user interface works on your phone, if you're not near a computer, it just has that same feel as like ESPN fantasy football, where you can check your rosters and make adjustments. But it's really cool that you guys, not only do we get to sit here and talk about that this platform exists, you guys actually just used it today. So that's awesome.
I will say it does work well on the phone. That's how I set the league up. That's
cool.
I'm sure some people drafted like that. You can't go change the draft order, I believe, on your phone. And you also can't change the way that scoring is set up unless you're on your laptop once you've created the league. But I think Mav will agree with me that it was closer to ESPN than I expected.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Like you could queue up your next pick and like it would auto draft them if you weren't looking, which was super helpful for me given that we had 30 seconds. But it was helpful. I did reach out. They mentioned, we had a lot of roster moves today. Like I said, we saw a starting quarterback get released. He broke his toe. He's out for the season. So they released him.
Crazy.
So I reached out to All Fantasy Sports. I've been talking to them as I've been setting up this league the whole time. They said once the API updates the rosters, then it will update automatically on the website. So they don't necessarily have a time on that, but it is coming probably in the next day or two. So what we did was I said, if you draft Ben Holmes, you get Luis Pettis. If you draft Devion Smith, you get Madre London. So that was how we did it. I said, if you pick a guy that got dropped, you automatically get their backup. Going into it, I said that. I said, know this as your draft strategy. So there's ways to work around it, and you just get creative. Like you said, you can have an entire just 5-slot Superflex team,
Right.
which I think is so cool.
Yeah,
and
it's
then and then
No,
you can have two different kinds of leagues. You can have a head-to-head or an overall score. So it gives you a lot of options. It's really fun, and I think we're going to see it's going to be a blast, especially playing. We've seen the USFL. It's come up quick and it's come up professionally and well done. And I think it's going to be really cool to be able to do fantasy with live updated stats. And I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm just excited to have some more football to watch and some fantasy football to play. You know, I mean, that's what all this is about. This is just supposed to be fun, right? Like, this isn't supposed to be super serious. I know I became a big fan this past season of daily, especially once it got into the playoffs and all the unique formats they had. So the idea of like an all flex team reminds me of like those single matchup daily fantasy matchups they had in the playoffs, where it was just all flex positions and you just tried to pick the best guys each week. So yeah, I mean, just have fun with it. And you know, if you got enough people that are interested in the league and it's going to exceed 8 people, maybe go that route and just see how crazy the rosters look when you're going all flex.
It's wild.
And still go for the quarterback stuff.
I mean, we had 3 flex and it was still wild. Like Mav and I literally have half the running backs in the entire league on our 2 teams because I was like, we're going to get the best running backs and no one else has them. And then we're going to trade for the best teams by week 3. That's a bad strategy.
You cornered the market.
Like, that's our strategy.
I thought about taking multiple defenses and then teams wouldn't even have a defense. Only them player.
Yeah, I forgot to specify that. Do specify if you have an 8-man league, you're only allowed 1 defense because
absolutely.
Some teams almost ended up with no defense, and I was like, that's gonna be pretty tough.
That can't be good.
Yeah,
I think that's a built-in rule. I think you should only be allowed to take 1 defense, but
100%.
Otherwise, pretty hysterical. Yeah.
But I was happy. I got Mark Thompson, who the actual commissioner of the USFL believes has a chance at Offensive Player of the Year. So I thought that was cool. Gamblers backup running back, and I got the Gamblers defense. So I didn't get Clayton Thorson, but I got 2. I got the entire defense. I love
your
them.
Homer colors still showed in your draft, even
100%.
though you didn't get your boy Thorson. Yeah, that's understandable.
100%. Well, hopefully everybody at home watching understands now a better understanding of altfantasysports.com. They understand their relationship with SGPN. They understand what you do, what SGPN does. SGPN does also have a podcast with like an insane amount of episodes that you can go listen to on all sports. So that's really cool. Matt is on some of those episodes. This is his first episode with a good mic, so be prepared for that. But we're glad that we heard his smooth vocals throughout here. It's a nice voice, so no worries.
Oh, thanks. I'm flattered. Yeah. Thanks for letting me take it for a test drive, guys. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. This was a blast. You know, anytime you want to, maybe we'll meet up during the season and talk about the when football is actually being played and see who was very wrong and who was very right.
100%. I'd almost rather bet on our rankings right now than bet on my fantasy team that I just drafted. But it's all good. But Matt, you are our guest. I would love to give you a second to just plug yourself as much as you want right now. Tell the people what you're doing, where they can find you, what you have coming up. Go for it, my friend.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thanks, guys. I really like what you guys are doing here. I'm glad that there's people that are really passionate about the USFL and spring football in general. There can be a lot of negativity out there about these types of things, and it's just not worth it. Why not just have fun with it? So yeah, I can be found over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network website. My Twitter handle is mattmorse12. My Twitter is basically just full of football, USFL, NFL, MLB, anything fantasy football related. I do a lot of yelling at the Yankees and Jets front office because I'm just kidding, not really, but I tell the social media team how I really feel, as if it's going to somehow get to the front office and they're going to make the moves I want them to.
Because the woman sitting back there cares. She's like,
whatever. But so that's why I have the USFL, because I think the Bandits are going to be good and I need a good football team to root for. So I'm hoping that this is the case for once. But yeah, no, just feel free to check me out anytime. Shoot me messages if you have any questions about anything that we talk about at SGPN, USFL related, rankings, projections, otherwise. We're just here to have a good time and talk football. So yeah, enjoy.
And I think we accomplished that today. We had a good time. We talked a lot of football. Maverick made his debut on a USFL Network Live. My younger brother, love having him on here. He is younger, but he is taller. So I always like to give him that little plug.
Always happens.
But one more time, you can find me, Ace, at pocketaces_USFL on Twitter and Instagram. I cover all things Gamblers and USFL in general. We do live interviews with players. We had Coach JD Reynolds, the running back coach of the Gamblers, on. We cover it all. We have fun. Mav, where can we find you?
So you can find me right now just on Twitter at PodInMyTake1, and we cover all things Michigan Panthers. Let's hunt.
Yeah, he's been retweeted like 5 times by Chase Demore, and that was before we even interviewed him. So
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that guy's a personality and a big social media presence. I love it.
Yes. So one more time, we love our sponsor, Royal Retros. Go to royalretros.com, enter promo code USFL Network at checkout to get 10% off. Get yourself a hat like Mav and I are wearing, get a jersey, get a shirt, I think they have mini helmets, which looks super cool and are reasonably priced. Go do that. And then go check out the USFL Network YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. We're trying out TikTok. Chase convinced us. Just go check those out. And our most recent interview aired an hour before this. It was with Netflix personality, Too Hot to Handle star, Chase Demore. Incredibly down-to-earth, cool guy. I love talking to him. It was great. Check out everything we got and join us next week on Blitz Brothers Fantasy Show.